Hello, species guardians. Excuse my attire, but it says what I need to say. Connecticut. Boxing, because the science is sharing our identity boxing. I teach us things. The species body longs to shadow box on pace. Yes, and rest. No, boxing, martial arts, and wrestling they share an identity too. Group. As in, just like the cell body, cell nucleus, cell wall. These are three distinct identities of reception to positive that come also with that which is in reception of the invisible but still discernible gases, and the invisible but still discernible quality of the water, quality aspect and nature of the water simultaneously. For science, a trinity is inseparable from each finite grouped in simultaneous detail, and so also is a hyper simultaneous. But we have offensively, preemptively, logics, descriptions of logic measured and maintained by a breaching method before our founders were born. Effectively, self-valued rules with uses of criminal insidiousness, natures of positive treatments and of negative treatments, and regardless of who the person is or was, and the difference of that. And this is relative to where and to how our natural difference slash S, such as black pupils, whites of eyes, and different color eyes, they were assigned additional function, being systems tactically ulterior from the one that communicates with them, specifically to have that nature demonstrated, specifically to employ those demonstrations blamed on other things, others, or selves, and to propagate that, while that which, as it had already been done since semi-ancient times. Native Americans and our founders, with their help, without being able to even tell the other Native Americans, the other Americans. In other words, everyone was measured and maintained through ourselves. Humanities, volume science, individual group differences, and species difference. So this is manifest where and how, for example, both political sides, like the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. I lost my train of thought. But so they left out how exceptions in exception nature, for example, is used, however, by nature, additional ways from any we could make up or be as itself, which is not ourselves, but it is. And then some groups too. So we could discern the identity of relativity as it is with our quality aspects and nature, like how we have male, female, and the other species bodies also have male and female. We have black pupils, whites of eyes. Exception nature, different color eyes. Other bugs, even animals, they have exception nature. They have the black pupils, whites of eyes. Now, our founders did not have free speech, and people don't know this because others communicated for them. Because they were effectively, the preaching method used things like words, like research, to have criminally foreign influence, positive treatments, uses of it, as roles with instances, where the preaching method had and has roles with instances. and through our own, not just through our own, but shared as countries together too. Tactical interior from how the species was bound and is bound by the hyper simultaneous, that which we can't make up or be, but are anyway to an extent. But even though it's the littlest extent, wherever the littlest piece of itself is, even its complete identity of relationship to itself is right there and only increasing in its value with that little piece simultaneously. And the value of that, distinctly, non distinctly, and hyper simultaneously, slash simultaneously. So, what we see when we see that, we see it's not just a similar identity of relationship to ourselves, but we see its identity of relationship to itself, the identity of the hyper simultaneous. One that is that reason for that, but it is that self as those other creatures, but not as them, while as us. But anyway, if any pray, the vaccine. There are proofs that proper reception of the Old Testament and of the Quran, they left us archaeological evidences. More probably, and they want us to defend with passions and emotions that these books are about science of the hyper simultaneous, and how the sciences became criminally foreign influence because all location slash SR being used where and how we are manifest as syntax nature, therefore function. And again, this is for reasons and ways greater than and more finite than. Inactive. We're the only way we can control the active is right before it. See, we have a piece of ourselves that has already been, but it is still being. And it is also this piece that is diffusing from us. And it is value to that hypernative system that is forbid that. And so the value of indigenous populations increases because the need to discern the breaching method that came from semi-ancient times that used more remotely certain type of victim slash hyper victim only allowed to remember the words, not just the words, because the communications of communications is greater than and more finite than whatever is said with words. So they go back and forth with all sides in criminal and civil cases, and with lawyers, and with victims, and with victims advocates who are used remotely. At the same time, with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, though, and insidiousness of logic to the people of A through Z. You have to understand where and how this employed each age of correlation nature relative to words like wisdom, for example, or smart. What's what wisdom or who's wise and smart correlates as soon as possible. How the breaching method was sickly distinctly against Native Americans individually grouped in together. Oh, divide and conquer. Shut up and sit down. And sickly distinctly against our founders, who had to counter extort the other founders. No. Because our founders and the other founders, everyone was a fact true nature slave. Torture. Think about it. Who wants rules of slavery? How and why you guys left the correlation is relative to, in other words, you have excuses in the suburbs, the human body, and in the cities, sickly distinctly, you are victims. This was designed, the suburbs were designed before our founding parents were born. We know to an extent for torture, extortions, and slavery. They were measuring and maintaining who would be behind trying to get the next unity. next slam something, which would be a body of independence, already had sustained distinctly north and south through other countries, individually grouped and together, themselves already factory legislate those crazy laws, and we're not supposed to leave out witch trials, and where and how our founders had to counter, extort, and force help to win the last battle of the Revolutionary War in Wethersfield, Connecticut. But they had to leave slavery entrenched. We can't leave out how they had, you know, the courts and the interbranch used criminally foreign influence in their difference, while overt criminal enterprises and private ones were also needing to be counted at the same time. And the countries, how individually grouped them together, and the difference between when they were at war or not. The same thing with the Ukraine war. If you watch MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News, they're being used by their sources as a certain type of victim slash hyper victim, individually grouped and together. They're being used to get over on the simultaneous thing, what is actually simultaneously recorded. And how this is gotten away with involves also wire crime methods with the people who answer phones at locations. Now, this is also how they exploit how really they are worth and value relative to where and to how we have the countries individually grouped and together, shared secrecies together, methods they keep secret, but they communicate them. We know this with their suits and ties, the counters to them and exceptions when they speak for the law, as even the criminal enterprises do when they speak for life. They think about emotions. See, nature put this function where if someone speaks about their own emotions and passions or other people's, but they're going to use that definition to leave out the significance of what really came first and what really is important in that instance and who really is involved. See, increasingly, the criminal foreign influences, criminally foreign influence, for example, is a phrase that needs to be used to teach American history properly, to teach any modern country's history properly. Criminally foreign influence is a phrase that has to be understood. Criminal insidiousness is a phrase that has to be understood. I am not a lawyer. We could observe what is actually recorded hyper-evidentially. And evidentially means to discern how all sides in criminal and civil cases, and the lawyers on all sides, and victims advocates, and names with the courts, and names of the police forms involved, names on off the state judicial branch offices, on off the state corrections offices, their family members, on off where they live, on off where their friends live, corners of the streets. One of the things that Connecticut's interbranch and exception nature's roles, intercities and interstates with predicate acts with facts, and methods by that, as roles with federal rules of evidence as crimes, and federal evidence as crimes, and singular use, roles with singular use of uses of that. But that too was used also at all location slash S as collusions with what better than perfectly as complete remote possession over very critical quality aspects in nature slash S, and quality aspect in nature where we are its identity of relationship to itself, the hyper native, but the hyper simultaneous that we know is denied. Well, since before our founders were born, the suburbs were designed again for torture, extortion, slavery, rolls with a list of laws that were tactically, criminally foreign influenced, tactically delusions wrong. designed to cause negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, designed to employ nature's demonstrations of the breaching method with that, instead blamed on other things, others ourselves. Even when correctly, too, that also employed defenses of logic that leaves itself off, its identity, the breaching method itself. So we can call this a hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise. And what we can do, see, all other military exercises cost money. This way, just explaining it to your people, every modern country, more and more you have a product, you have a amount of value you can put into a common bank account, and we can do way more than that with it with each modern country, and especially knowing no crazy stuff is going to tip off. The only way to ensure that, though, is to understand how there is more than each country involved with it, and it is not the overt criminal enterprises and or nor alone, and it is not the private ones and or nor alone, and it is how it is differentially then, but better than perfectly, increasingly at the same time with the interbranch and with not legitimately reasons too, because they have roles with undercover, plainclothes police officers, also with the projections of, they have roles with logic and backgrounds that they can't offend and they can't afford to have discerned. Because those lies, like when they use the words politician or politics, they blame the real causes of negative value nature, progressions, acts, and nature. Like when, with response to those things, for example, they're blaming on politics. Even where and how that is true, it is being used to screen, would propagate such the things to be self-value juxtaposed. Because the preaching method is also involved with the motivations of the people, for example, pretending passions and emotions against crimes. Certain type of victim slash hyper victim. For example, MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News have pictures of California, real or made up. One thing it is about, it left out how the infrastructure was designed, tactically denatured to cause negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. And play too, blame simultaneously, blame the other things others are self-propagated, self-cultivated too, by that which would follow leading, as quality of fact human nature, aspects of fact human nature. And nature itself has criminal insidiousness. We have to discern the difference between criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments when people are using logic, even if it's used by others too. And we have to understand how every opposite, everything is in demonstration of the simultaneous slash hyper simultaneous, which is honest science reveals. So the value of truth before the order of the smallest finite detail, with resumption of with preservation of the republic for which we stand now. This came from before modern religions were founded. It had already been criminally foreign influence. Already the names of the species bodies, parts, had been individually grouped and together, forced, checked, hurt, and persuaded, and worse, not realizing, but to an extent, they were blaming other things, others themselves, wrongly, where they had to counter as fact human nature things like criminal insidiousness, positive treatments with fact human nature and or negative treatments, and per the collusions of that. Because wherever there is an identity treatment, there is a treatment of positive and negative relativity simultaneously. And identity has relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. We see how fragile Earth's relativity to the sun is, and we're all over it with space, with theory. Science would, all that money and the peace could have been if real science had spoke. It shows that all sides in criminal and civil cases, victims and victims advocates, and still worse than witch trial courts and police forms, and then pretending passions and emotions other. See, they can't defend that on paper when they speak about passions and emotions. Then they make narratives about that and pretend that they prevent other people to function by passions and emotions. Being so that if they're not going to be used to, they can be used to make sure that not the slightest finite detail, but this is for its system, not for our systems. These are courts that recorded themselves asking questions to measure and maintain roles with torture, extortion, and slavery, where and how tools have been used for lies by all sides in criminal and civil cases, the lawyers, the victims, and the victims' advocates, their family members, and those with the courts, the hallway of the court, and then again through time. And these are the Connecticut intercities names, also intercampuses, predicate acts with facts rules, and with the news media. And as the names on off the World Trade Center attack, a number of identities or roles with them. And as there are rules with the names that attach Saudis to change the audio and video transcripts regarding their rules, I was on with Whiting Forensics has rules forced a Saudi with the Whiting Forensics, Weathersfield Police, Newington Police families, Hartford Police families, probably Hartford too, where they robbed in Newington. A guy named Brett. What they do with it, and the FBI director, former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and co-defendants of his, former standing chairperson on the Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organization Act. He's also recorded involved with names that I've been typing on my YouTube and on Facebook, who have roles also with rape threats before the principal child abuser was caught. And with Joshua Julian had been typing on his Facebook page. And he's associated with KKK and Confederate flag themed and black themed military police switching names with interbranch switching names. So these are people that can't defend what is actually recorded. They need to pretend their passions and emotions and roles with passions crimes were for other than they were, because I caught them before the World Trade Center attack at other locations with their family members and intimate ties, and mixed up things with that. Also used the screen. So in other words, all along roads and routes in each of the cities and towns, they have roles with this method, where and how it is. One of the questions is how could they stay? One of the evidences you have to ask yourself questions, right? How could they get away with it for so long, pretending that anyone spoke of honesty or for honesty regarding science of New York City's problems, the real causes of negative ionization progressions, action natures, originally and still grouped problems and together, and what to do about them. The narratives and the natures differentially are offensively, and the difference between that is used where they are being and have been used remotely as victim predators, hyper victim, hyper predators. So the hyper victim is per those uses of all those crazy laws against the colonists and then against the people of the states, and then blaming other things other themselves, even when correctly, like Jim Crow laws. How could you explain Jim Crow laws properly? You can't even explain American if you don't have American history understood properly. How can you explain that properly if you don't understand the phrase criminal foreign influences? And that's an understatement too, because you have to refer to it per science, actually honest and proper criminal foreign influences slash hyper criminal foreign influences. And it's differentially that way, where relativity to subjects is manifest, the way it is actually manifest, where how our syntax is actually manifest. I tell you, where how the hyper invisible but still discernible comes with the value of the invisible but still discernible. That languages are the parts of speech of each. The appearances of their difference are in them some demonstration of the same thing. The sciences share an identity. Boxing, martial arts, in wrestling, it is easier to discern how they share an identity. Relative distinctly, non distinctly, and hyper simultaneously as itself, as the same identity as the other sciences. Where again, where how this goes and where and how it uses exceptions and exception nature, additional ways from any that we could invent or make up or be individually grouped in together and with difference, group difference slash S. And the group difference comes from where there is a singular, a hyper singular, tied to all other singular aspects, where and how it is functional, where there is a distinct identity of hyper invisible this way. So the needs to use the name of a country is where and how its identity of relationship to itself as the hyper simultaneous, as a singular, in other words, appears to be just a simultaneous. But how it is not, it is that identity of relationship to itself. That is just is why the other species bodies are distinctly, non-distinctly, and hyper simultaneously like ourselves, like with the qualities, aspects in nature, like our eyes, black pupils. Even bugs have black pupils. See the eyes of giraffes, black pupils, whites of eyes. In other words. And the exceptions would be how we have exceptions and they don't. See, one thing exceptional about America, humanity, we're the only species that's criminally foreign influence. And again, this is per the hypernative systems method of discerning what's criminally foreign influence. The branches of government, Jim Crow laws themselves, let alone the slavery laws, and you don't leave that out, the witch trials, and which forces to be left out, the other natures of crazy laws against everyone who people could say, oh my God, you said something that's going to hurt that type of person. Meanwhile, there's a group involved with gangs, overt criminal enterprises, and private ones. One of the only ways they could get away with that is because they have their roles with the families next to the state capital of Connecticut as plainclothes police, where that lie is used for truth is used for a lie, where people pretend that they have to defend unmarked police forms. So they have roles with uses of words like police, where they force collusions with or judges or politicians. There are certain type of victim slash hyper victim. Two, that won't be addressed right, because if you try to address it, like see how they have the protests in front of the justice's house. Obviously, you're not supposed to protest in front of justice's house, but they're telling people to protest in front of the justice's house. And these are communications locations that have roles of the wire crime acts and methods. They're recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, reliant upon faith of the agencies and of what's already written in databases. There are a whole bunch of means to observe fake things have been stacked in databases. WFSB and WTNH and Fox Connected News, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. The intelligence community uses them to plant predicate acts with facts, where they make honest responses, where how they have roles of falsifying police reports with a principal child abuser, and to force that before it was caught, because they had roles with other natures of organized crime. And the names involved with that were also involved with elderly homes and remote uses of the probate courts, natures of courts, with the elderly homes, and how they have, and with the VA home, how they have medicines, how they have people speaking about medicines and mental things who aren't even doctors, and the ones who are doctors still overtly slash insidiously, simultaneously, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, raw. Not even doctors, follow the course, black pupils. Yeah. They've been sticking fake things. They've been exploiting an anomaly. Looking in databases, sticking fake things in there. Then sometimes they pretend they're not talking about things because it's their patients. Sometimes they're pretending they're really telling people that all the people were their patients, and because they're lying about the simultaneous, and they're needing to do so deferentially because they have personal and professional roles with prosecutors and judges at various natures of courts. Hartford courts and New Britain District Court have roles with foreign and domestic military at West Hartford locations with federal rules of evidence as crime, federal evidence as crimes, and the value uses of that used singular, but and also that what it causes used singular too. Again, right back to the same locations, like a park in West Hartford is one of the ones. So these are people. Weathersfield Interbranch has a state judicial branch offices on Route 3, and they're involved with Weathersfield Police, with other police departments and their families, retired and standing, and they have wire crime acts and methods. And but it's with other police forms and ones with forensics locations through time. Their roles with various natures of organized crime bodies before they got caught, various natures of federal criminals before they got caught, pretending passions and emotions with the interbranch families. Even if that was legitimate for whatever they call legitimate, they have rules again with predicate acts with facts, all sides in criminal and civil cases, including in the Ninth Circuit, right next to the World Trade Center, leading up to that context, in that context and sense. A whole bunch of people tied to a Claudia Scalora and other people named Scalora have rules with malls and with shopping centers. Also one in West Hartford, and they have roles with predicate acts with facts, with people with child abuse, identity theft, fraud, slander. Now, these are also employments of fake sides of issues and exception nature as collusions, wherein how they have issues regarding child trafficking and overt criminal enterprises, wherein how they have roles with them. There are people with the Los Salitos involved with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, at locations next to Hartford Hospital, with the intelligence community, with the Tomorrow family, and with our ILO family. That also have roles on and off campuses that didn't even have people that didn't even have classes with them, where they have rules planting evidence as sequence shifts, federal evidence is crime, federal rules of evidence is crimes, identity theft, fraud, slander, that are relative to where to how it is left out. That's one of the things sickly distinctly against everyone, including our founders. An identity theft, fraud, slander method measures and maintains other communicated for our founders as James Madison and as George Washington, as the version of him that had to counter extort the people entrenched with slavery north and south and force them to help us to win the last battle of the Revolutionary War, which we know slavery was still entrenched north and south. The Constitution was still a bridge. It was still other than they had means to get. Two, they had to put Marbury versus Madison. See, two, now we still have to get criminally foreign influence takes on needs to the appearances of justice. Offensively, they are used remotely people involved with the January 6th treatments as the sources of the interbranch and as themselves. I mean, and as the news media with that and themselves. That's which is also a retired and standing interbranch intelligence community. This includes names on off the state of Connecticut judicial branch offices, on off the state of Connecticut corrections offices. They have roles with reports of so, WFSB, Fox Connecticut News, 20 years ago, 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 20 ye and WTNH. WTNH was used for digital crimes, where fake emails with some child offenders with upskirt natures forced on off the campuses, and medical families, male and female, involved also with prosecutors' families and with judges' families, who've been involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders against strangers since they were kids, putting fake conversations with people into databases. It's relative to where and how they get it, part of how they get away with it. A whole bunch of people tied to a Christopher Cullen who went out of their way to pretend to know me as roles with various natures of organized crime with middle school and grammar school kids, and even younger, and medical corruption with kids, times with overt criminal enterprises and the witness protection program involved. These are some of the sources and roles with the uses remotely of predicate acts with facts methods, criminal insidiousness, propagation, self-cultivation method. That's who wants to debate. That's what the value of what was entrenched here, not just before our founders were born, and why and how it was through their lives. So they pretend that evidence is that our founders had roles with slavery. They measure and maintain that to measure and maintain worse than obfuscated, and no one realizing about what we know. Our founders had to counter extort the other founders. The laws were so crazy against everyone, they had to lie about their motivations for the fake unity, for the fake independence, while still has syntax nature that was applied functionally to hurt, torture, extort, and enslave their fellow humanity. Not just people with called black, people, everyone, sickly distinctly to keep out sickly down distinctly from being discerned. A simple function method. So just trying to explain and figure out what I'm talking about, even if I got it wrong. Maybe you say you're right. So whoever would disagree as another country, for example, or as a part of a country. If I could get one part of one country, a mayor or something like that, to agree with me, we can get the country, especially if I can get a country, I can know you guys can get the leader to agree, if it's Biden, if whoever it is. Because this is, this is the hypernative pure is real always. Who denies that honesty never spoke with passions behind it for New York City as science pretending it's integrity? In other words, if you can't see the preaching method's presence, not just historically, but still active, you know, if you try to deny it, your nature too, it's going to you're going to be finite, grouped, and increasing demonstration means to demonstrate that. Just like we would have had demonstrated in all kinds of cases, but for how they go back and forth with all sides of cases, where the names at those locations and precedents in the statutes itself has manifest quality aspects, nature, and demonstration of uses of itself, being and having been used criminally for and influence, tactically delusions wrought, human syntax, human function, exploitation, roles. We are value/value progression. Oh, species body code. So in other words, then I'll just start mean stacking. Because in other words, we'll get the big countries and the exceptions. And like anywhere where there's a strait, and there's commerce problems and things like that, and anywhere there's religion, you guys left out what it said in the beginning of the Old Testament. You guys left out what it said in the beginning of the Quran, where it's about science. You can pretend their passions and emotions anyway. And when defenses of that forces a quality of fact-checking nature that will not permit Short words that make convictions that don't deny the slightest sequence shift, the slightest finite detail left out, don't deny simultaneous value as that which is hyper-evidential, which could be used without even a book, without any research to demonstrate that. With just what we know off our heads, commonly about American history. For example, simultaneously. You have to list the simultaneous. See, programming is easier and is harder tactically ulterior than they could have afforded to discern for their roles with databases since before computers, with this breaching method and without exploiting other locations, and with them pretending not to realize for additional motivations apparent, but all that too used remotely. It's also relative to how they could get away with pretending integrity spoke for each of the sciences, including the religions. It says the most important part is right up in the front in both books, and no one even realizes that. Because all identity ground location slash S, where our fact human nature collusions, where and how you guys had to replace what you would have been able to correlate, discern, communicate, and able to materialize, which is itself's identity of relationship to itself. That causes evolution's fruits and gifts and means out of nowhere. And especially if we keep checking to make sure they're not criminal insidious in the natures of evolution's fruits and gifts and means out of nowhere. Yeah. See, I teach us things belong. So do not take too long. Nothing will just stuck you mean. And the whole world will help as long as they see hear that. One identity of country being that nature that admits the whole ground's been tactically denatured since semi-ancient times. When did sciences be legitimate? When were the thoughts of sciences were legitimate? Drive their minds with, ooh, we're going to look at time. Get down! Say they take a microscope, get their money back from the microscopes. Watch. CT. So watch what I caught them doing with the schools further. Please, leaders of the kids, everyone's forcing everyone to speak through others. And I've been asking for a long time. And there's a Kathy Tansey also involved with the women, um, involved with the confessions, with the men, involved with the men. And with the Wethersfield Police Department's phones with wire crime accesses and they forged and switched names, also had locations, and with other police forms involved with them and other police departments. So obviously they've been lying about their motivations. And when there are truths, they've been using them for lies too. Don't forget, you can't lie to the police. And they're lying to me offensively so long, I figured out how to catch them, and I did. Hartford Hospital has a whole bunch of people tied to the Dillon family and people with Wethersfield locations and names involved. I don't know where the Leahy family lives, but they pretended conversations with me as doctors. Brendan Leahy and his father, people involved with nurses, with drugs and medicine crimes, untimely deaths, and then again through time with the same locations used for federal rules. Where and how used are remotely criminally foreign influence uses of investigations of investigators and of defenses of that, which are defenses of logic, quality aspects, and as collusions. They have locations with types of experts to counter types of negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, where those types of experts are used to hide what those locations have been used for. Criminally foreign influence roles with juxtaposed natures of distinct natures of criminal insidiousness of gangs. So these people are little identities that fraudsters roles. They are not legitimate roles with making police forms and justice and lawyers on off Yukon. on off the military locations and shipping locations like UPS and the mail offices and spots next to it who are being brought out by the Wethersfield police, who are refusing to get on paper because they already described lies about fake conversations you made. And over the phone, they replaced what's actually recorded. You should fear God. Make sure, because they have juxtaposed police forms with the schools, further involved with their family members, how abuses of them to get them to abuse others. And including those abuses also account where they help them, even regardless of the difference of them, because the hurt comes through making people use criminal insidious natures of positive treatments, negative treatments, which are identity treatments at the same time. And the nature's reason why, with value to relative to positive and negative simultaneously too, is because of where and how it shows us. We have that semi-nature relationship to its complete identity of relationship to itself that will not change, and the only increasing value of understanding that. So you guys have other your contemplations now. Fake branches, bow on every land. I'll understand. So we have this method, and then we can make it a hyper archetypal criminal enterprise to counter uh, hyper archetypal criminal enterprise, and we'll see how it had to pretend it's had to adopt itself. At first, it didn't want to be known as a devil because it's going to tell on it. Then it had to become the devil to keep other things other than themselves blamed for the real cause of negative attitude and progressive act. Same reason I believe in Islamic culture. We're not supposed to, I don't know if it's in the Quran, because the Quran says all you have to understand right to the front too. It says, all you have to do to be a Muslim is agree to call, and you don't even have to pray in a mosque for the slightest reason you feel. All you have to do to be a Muslim is agree to call the hyper simultaneous, for my translation of it, Allah plus alpha long alpha's high. This teaches about alpha and omega decipher. See how Jesus said he is the alpha, he is the omega. He had to leave us cipher. And that's why we have to understand the importance of sequence value truth, the value of truth, sequence truth. Like where and how it says right in the beginning, then the Old Testament says, all you have to understand is right to hear. All. And it says with the beginning of the Quran too. All you have to do is either agree to call it Allah or not, and you're supposed to love the people who don't call it that, and you're not supposed to force anyone to pray in a mosque. Obviously, if they're not, if the Quran tells them for the slightest reason don't pray there. For some reason, don't agree. So you guys have everything defended out of sequence. Because I have roles with psychiatries and psychologies and sociology theories and delusions and convictions that are mixed with tactical delusions and uses of themselves remotely as their roles with investigators use remotely criminally foreign influence, pretending they could speak for the identities of the sciences, let alone the law, let alone of identity. So it's very simple. This is it. And where it is complex, where it is complicated, or where it is simple, is tactical ulterior from the way they say, because they're lying about the simultaneous, because they're needing to get over on the hyper simultaneous, which is hyper native pure. The Native Americans know that these value nature systems will not afford the human body. They mean the means that we actually have to heal. They actually denature ground below our feet, water, their identity of relationship to themselves, which is an active thing that communicates. It shows what's going to cause positive or negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. And how to make means from nowhere, out of nowhere appear. And again, we have to understand how the preaching method employed negative output, not just to be blamed on other things, others ourselves, and use of the exceptions, and to screen the preaching method, employed all that would cause right back to our locations, have rules with our quality aspect, our quality of fact human nature. As each age of correlation nature too, now assign differences tactical ulterior from where than they were actually before. So the Leahy family also has their own kids involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, making up things against me, and using remotely their kids, pretending just because I use their names online or whatever like that. They put me in fake conversations with themselves through the mail too. These are people involved with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and Brian Silver with Connecticut District Court, and people with Hartford and the Britain Superior Court involved with investigators involved with various natures of organized crime and child abuses through time at spots next to Central Connecticut State University, not legitimately trained to be ibonics or whatever like that. There's a great Gill, there's a Kyle Gill, who's one of the ones who implied he's involved with plainclothes police forms. Also, there was implied that maybe ebonics is why he talks like that. He's used to plant evidences, fake motivations, where they record things after they already had other recorded. They communicate other than that's how they leak things. Former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, leaked his roles since before the Obama administration on all sides of Central Connecticut State University. His roles with various natures of organized crime bodies on campuses I went to, including with our principal child abusers campus, who was involved with other natures of organized crime at the same time. And the families involved with that were also involved with elderly homes. And they have roles with the military and things like that with VA. They're sick fakes with psychiatry. Make sure they pay those, they observe how that VA looks like those big people stacking in New York City. See, that was used to measure and maintain who's going to try to make it safe, who's going to try to call it tactive and denature, who's going to try not to pretend they're free. Get down! Fear. See, all those three simultaneously, too. Ugh. So they've been offensively asking questions, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, rot, pretend they have legitimacy into branch. Increasingly, they have to hide that at other locations. And they are shown that by the breaching method, where how there is remotely, that is also recorded. So they should just, all these countries are guilty together and differentially, increasingly, that's exploited consciously too. See how this is about difference. We have the same color eyes, distinct, non-distinctly. We have different color eyes at the same time, distinctly. Because one identity shows us distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously all things and further hyper-simultaneously. So it is five distinct identities of relationship to itself. As we are shown, each cell body is received. In other words, Romulus and Remus is a science that goes with this Alpha and Omega. And the Trinity, physics, metaphysics, and identity are bound. All gathered around vaccines. See Black History by Anthony Baum. I quote that from that's from the song. I don't know if I have to quote that or what. Thank you.